30 days. Live my world for 1 month and you'll understand why I asked. So, Marcus, do we have a deal?
The night Richard Whitmore set that envelope on my kitchen table, my daughter was asleep down the hall, and I could hear the little box fan she loved humming through her cracked door. I remember that sound because I held on to it. I held on to it the way you grab a railing when the floor tilts under you. Richard was smiling the way rich men smile when they already believe they have one. And he looked at me across a table I built myself, in a rented house on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, and he said the words that changed the next 30 days of my life. 1 month, he said. You live your life and I watch. If you can carry all of this without breaking, I will stop standing in the way. If you break, you let my daughter go, and you take the check inside that envelope, and you never contact her again. I did not open the envelope that night. I want you to remember that because a lot of what happened after came down to what a man will and will not pick up off a table. My name is Marcus Bell. I am 34 years old. I fix heating and cooling systems for a living, which means I spend my summers on hot rooftops and my winters in freezing basements, and I have done it for 11 years. I am a single father. My daughter is named Nia, and she is 7, and she is the reason I get up before the sun and the reason I stopped drinking and the reason I learned to braid hair off a phone video at 2 in the morning 3 years ago when everything in my life fell apart. 3 years ago, I lost my wife, Denise. She was driving home from her sister's place in Dayton when a truck ran a red light on a wet road. I got the call at work. I was on a ladder when my phone rang, and I almost let it go to voicemail because I was busy. I have thought about that 1,000 times. I answered, and a stranger's voice told me my whole life had ended, and I climbed down that ladder, and I have honestly never felt fully steady on my feet since. Nia was 4. She kept asking when mommy was coming back, and I did not have the words, so for a long time I just held her and let her ask. People think the hardest part of losing someone is the funeral. It is not. The hardest part is the ordinary Tuesday 6 months later when your kid wants pancakes shaped like a cat and only her mother knew how to do it, and you burn 3 of them trying, and your little girl looks at you like you failed a test you did not know you were taking. I did not have a lot of help. My mother passed when I was in my 20s. My father was never really in the picture in a way worth talking about. Denise's family lived in Georgia and grieved from far away and slowly drifted out of our lives, which is its own quiet kind of loss. So it was me and Nia, just us. I picked up extra jobs on weekends. I learned to plan a whole week of meals on a Sunday. I learned which coworkers I could trust to cover a shift when Nia had a fever, and I learned that most people help you once and then remember they are busy. I made a lot of sacrifices in those years, and I am not saying that to sound noble. I am saying it because it matters to what happened later. I turned down a promotion to a supervisor role 2 different times because it meant travel and I could not travel. I drove a truck with 190,000 miles on it and prayed at every stoplight. I skipped the doctor for a bad tooth for almost a year because a filling was money that could be Nia's field trip. I sold Denise's car because I could not look at it and because we needed the money. I kept one of her sweatshirts. I still have it. That was my world. And that was the world Richard Whitmore wanted to spend a month inside. I met Claire almost 2 years after Denise died. Claire Whitmore. She was a 2nd grade teacher at Nia's elementary school, and she had this way of talking to kids like they were whole people, not small annoyances you had to manage. Nia adored her before I ever did. Nia would come home talking about Miss Claire this and Miss Claire that, and one day at a school fundraiser I finally introduced myself and I fumbled it completely. I said something about the weather, but Claire laughed like I had said something charming, and she asked me a real question about myself, and something in my chest that had been locked for a long time turned just a little. We took it slow. We took it so slow that our first real date happened 4 months after that fundraiser, and it was just coffee, and I spent the whole time terrified I had forgotten how to be a person who wanted things. But Claire was patient. She never rushed Nia, never tried to be a replacement, never made me choose. She would sit on the floor and do puzzles with my daughter and let Nia set the pace of how much she was allowed in. Over a year, she earned a place in our lives, and I did not give that place away cheaply. Here is the thing I did not fully understand at first. Claire came from money, real money. Her father, Richard, built things. He was a commercial developer, the kind of man whose name is on a plaque outside buildings downtown, the kind of man who owns land you did not know a person could own. Claire never acted like it. She drove a normal car and clipped coupons and taught second grade because she loved it, not because she needed the paycheck. So I did not think much about the money until the day I met her father. That day is where the trouble really starts. Claire invited me to a dinner at Richard's house. A big house north of the city, the kind with a gate and a driveway longer than my whole street. I wore my one good shirt. I brought a bottle of wine I could not really afford because that is what you do. And Richard Whitmore met me at the door, shook my hand a beat too hard, looked me up and down and said, "So you are the one." Not a question, a verdict. Dinner was long and cold in a way that had nothing to do with the food. Richard asked me questions that sounded polite but were actually little tests. What did I make in a year? What was my plan? What kind of neighborhood was I raising his granddaughter's little friend in, he said, and I remember catching that he could not even say Nia's name. He talked about stability a lot. He talked about the right environment a lot. And near the end, over dessert nobody wanted, he said something I will never forget. He said, "Claire has never had to struggle. I made sure of that. And I am not going to sit here and watch her sign up for a lifetime of it." Claire got quiet. I could see she was embarrassed and angry, but she was also his daughter, and there is a way that even strong people go small around a parent who has always controlled the room. I stayed calm. I said, "I am not asking Claire to struggle. I am asking her to be happy." And Richard looked at me like I had told a joke he did not find funny. That should have been the warning sign. It was honestly, but I loved his daughter, and I convinced myself that a hard father was just a father who cared, and that I could win him over with time and decency. I told myself that a lot in those weeks. I told myself he would come around. That was my first mistake, and it was not the last. A few weeks after that dinner, Richard called me. Not Claire. Me. He asked to come by my place. My actual place, the rented house on the east side. I was surprised, but I thought maybe he wanted to make peace, so I said yes. I cleaned for 2 days. I want to be honest about that. I scrubbed a house I was ashamed for a rich man to see, and I hated that I was ashamed because it was a good home. It was clean and warm and full of love, and here I was polishing it like I owed him an apology for my own life. He came on a Thursday night. He looked around slowly. He touched the table I built, ran a finger along the edge like he was checking for dust, and he sat down. And then he laid out the challenge. He said he had a proposal. He said he was a practical man and that emotion had no place in decisions that would shape his daughter's whole future. So he wanted to run an experiment. 1 month, 30 days. During that time, he would insert himself into my life. He would shadow me. He would watch how I lived, how I worked, how I parented, how I handled pressure. He said, and these were close to his exact words, "I want to see your world with my own eyes. I want to see if a man like you can actually carry it, or if you just get lucky day to day until something breaks." And then he set the envelope on the table. He told me there was a check inside. He would not say for how much. He said if at any point in that month I decided this was too much, if I decided Claire was better off without the weight of my life, all I had to do was pick up the envelope and walk away, and he would make sure I never wanted for anything again. But if I made it through the month without breaking, without begging, without failing his granddaughter, he said, then he would give us his blessing and never interfere again. I asked him why. Why would he do this? And he said something that told me exactly who he was. He said, "Because everyone breaks, Marcus. I just want to be there when you do, so my daughter can see it too. I should have thrown him out. Part of me wishes I had. But I looked at that envelope, and I thought about all the times in my life somebody had decided what I could and could not carry before I ever got the chance to try. And something in me got very quiet and very sure. I slid the envelope back across the table toward him, and I said, "You can watch. But you are not going to see what you came to see. That was the beginning of the month. The first week, Richard actually showed up. I did not think he would, but he did. He rode along in my work truck on a Monday, sitting in the passenger seat in slacks that cost more than my monthly car payment, and I took him to a job at an apartment complex on the south side where the AC had gone out in 12 units in August. It was 96 degrees. I was on my back under a rusted condenser unit for 2 hours, and Richard stood in the shade and watched, and I could feel him waiting for me to complain. I did not complain. I did my job. I explained to a tired mother of 3 why her air would be back on by evening, and I saw her shoulders drop with relief, and I felt more like a man in that moment than I ever have in any room with a gate around it. That night Richard came back to my house because part of the deal was that he saw the whole day, the parenting too. He watched me pick Nia up from her after-school program. He watched me help her with a reading worksheet and make dinner and give a bath and read 3 books, because she always negotiates for one more. And I caught him watching Nia with a strange look on his face when she laughed at something, like he had expected to find a broken child in a broken home. And instead he found a happy little girl who trusted her father completely. I thought maybe I was getting through to him. I was wrong, because in the second week, things started to happen that were not accidents. The first thing was my hours. I had been getting steady overtime for months, which mattered, because that overtime was Nia's savings account and my cushion against the world. That week, out of nowhere, my supervisor told me overtime was getting cut across the board. He would not look me in the eye when he said it. I did not think much of it at first. Things happen. Budgets tighten. But then it kept going. The second thing was an anonymous complaint filed against me at work. Somebody claimed I had been rude and unprofessional on a job I could not even remember having a problem on. It went in my file. My supervisor apologized privately and said it was probably nothing, but it stayed in the file, and in my line of work a file with complaints in it is the difference between the next promotion and the door. The third thing was the worst. Nia's school called me. Someone had reported a concern about her home situation to the school, an anonymous concern, suggesting she might not be properly cared for. Now let me tell you what that does to a single father who lost his wife and built his whole life around one little girl. Puts a cold hand around your heart and squeezes. The school was kind about it. The counselor knew me, knew Nia, and she said it was almost certainly nothing and it went nowhere. But the fact that someone had reached into the safest part of my world and tried to poison it, that stayed with me. I did not connect it all at first. I want to be honest about that too. When you are grinding through life at the bottom of the ladder, you get used to things going wrong. You do not assume a conspiracy. You assume it is just your turn to have a hard week. So I put my head down. I picked up a weekend side job to make up for the lost overtime. I lost sleep. I got quieter, and Richard watched all of it, and I noticed he had stopped looking bored. He was watching very closely now, almost hungry, and I could not figure out why. The turning point came from Nia, of all people. One evening, Nia was drawing at the kitchen table while I cooked, and she said, without looking up, "Daddy, Mr. Whitmore's friend was outside my school again." I stopped stirring. I asked her what she meant. She said there had been a man in a gray car parked near her school pickup line 2 different days, and one day he had talked to her teacher, and she recognized him because he had come to the house once with Mr. Whitmore. A tall man with a beard. I knew exactly who that was. That was a man named Del Frazier, who I had come to understand worked for Richard. Not as a builder, as a fixer. A man Richard paid to handle problems quietly. And that was the moment the whole picture snapped into focus, and I felt something cold and clear settle over me. The overtime, the complaint, the call to the school. None of it was bad luck. It was engineered. Richard was not just watching my world. He was reaching into it and lighting small fires everywhere he could, and then standing back to see if I would burn. But I did not have proof. And a man with money and a man without it do not get believed the same way. I knew that if I confronted Richard with nothing but my daughter's word about a gray car, he would smile that smile and tell me I was paranoid. and he would tell Claire that the pressure was making me unstable, which was exactly the story he wanted to sell. So I did something that went against every instinct screaming in me. I stayed calm. I started paying attention, and I started writing things down. I kept a notebook, dates, times, everything. The day the overtime was cut, the exact date of the complaint, the day the school called, Nia's descriptions of the gray car. I was quiet and I was patient, and it was the hardest thing I have ever done, because part of me wanted to drive up to that gated house and scream. But I have a daughter who was watching how her father handles the worst kind of unfair. So I chose to handle it like a man she could be proud of. Then came the betrayal that I did not see coming, and it did not come from Richard. I had a friend at work named Trey. Trey and I had come up together, started at the company the same month 11 years back. He had been to my house. He had eaten at my table. When Denise died, Trey was one of the few who actually showed up, who sat with me, who did not disappear after the funeral. I trusted him more than almost anyone. I found out about Trey by accident. I left my phone at the shop one afternoon and came back for it after hours, and the back office door was open, and I heard Trey's voice on a call, and I heard him say a name that stopped me cold. He said, "I got you what you needed on Bell. The complaint is in his file like you wanted. That is the last one though. I am done. This is getting ugly." I stood in that hallway and I felt the floor tilt again, the way it did 3 years ago on that ladder. Trey had been feeding Richard information about me for weeks. My schedule, my weak spots, which jobs I had been on so a fake complaint could be filed. Trey was the one who had helped get my overtime pulled by telling Richard's people exactly which manager to lean on with a business favor. My friend, a man who had grieved my wife with me, had sold me out to a rich stranger, and when I found the courage to ask him why, standing right there in that hallway, he could not even look at me. He said Richard had offered him money. A lot of money. His own kid needed surgery and his insurance was fighting him and he was drowning. And Richard had appeared like the devil always does, right when a good man is weak, and offered to make the drowning stop. I understood it. That is the part that haunts me. I understood exactly why Trey did it, because I have been that desperate, and desperation makes monsters of ordinary people. But understanding is not the same as forgiving, and it is definitely not the same as trusting again. Something between us broke that day that has never come back. But here is what Trey did next, and it is why I still believe most people have a piece of good left in them. Trey was ashamed, and before he quit that job and moved his family out of state, he gave me something. He gave me copies of the text messages between him and Del Frazier. Messages that named Richard directly. Messages that laid out the whole plan in plain words. He said, "I cannot fix what I did, but you should not lose everything because a rich man got bored and decided to play with your life." And he handed me the proof I had been missing. Now, let me tell you about the choice I made, because this is the part where a lot of people would have gone a direction I did not go. I had it all now. I had a notebook full of dates. I had my daughter's account. I had text messages that could bury Richard Whitmore, that could humiliate him, that could maybe even bring lawyers into it. And there was a version of me, a version I had to talk down, that wanted to blow his whole life apart. Send the messages to his business partners. Post them online. Watch the powerful man burn the way he tried to make me burn. But I have a 7-year-old daughter who was watching, and I kept coming back to one question. What kind of man did I want Nia to remember when she grew up? A man who won ugly, or a man who won clean? And I realized that if I destroyed Richard out of rage, I would be handing him the thing he wanted most, which was proof that a man like me could not be trusted with self-control, could not be trusted around his family, was exactly the danger he claimed. Revenge would have made his story true. So I did not blow up his life. I did something quieter and, I think, harder. I called Claire, and I asked her to come to my house alone, because there was something she needed to see. She came that evening, worried, because I had gone quiet for 2 weeks and she knew something was wrong. I sat her down at the same table where her father had set that envelope, and I told her everything. Calmly, I showed her the notebook. I showed her the text messages between her father's fixer and my former friend. I told her about the gray car outside her student's school, near her own second graders, because Del Frazier had been watching my daughter to build a case that Nia was unsafe. I watched Claire's face fall apart, because a child learning who their parent really is, that is its own kind of grief. She read those messages 3 times. She kept saying, "No, he would not. He would not do this." And then she got to one message where her father, in his own words, told Del to, quote, "make Belle's life hard enough that he takes the money and disappears," and she went completely silent. And I saw her stop defending him. I saw her let go of a version of her father she had held onto her whole life. Then Claire told me something that landed like a second blow, and I have to be honest about it because it is the truth of what happened. She said, "He told me. Not the details. But he told me he was going to test you. He said it was a father's right to make sure. And I let him, Marcus. I did not think he would go this far, but I knew about the month and I said nothing. I told myself it was harmless. So there it was. Claire had known about the challenge from the beginning. Not the sabotage. Not the fixer or the school or Trey. But she had known her father was running an experiment on the man she claimed to love, and she had stayed quiet and let it happen. That was her betrayal. Smaller than her father's, but real. And I had to sit with the fact that the woman I had let into the most guarded part of my life had watched me get tested like an animal and had not warned me. I did not scream at her. I was very tired by then, the kind of tired that goes past anger into something clearer. I said, "You could have told me. On day 1, you could have told me, and we could have faced it together." Instead, I spent a month wondering if I was going crazy, wondering if the whole world was just against me again, when the person who loved me knew the truth and held it. And she cried, and she did not defend herself because there was no defense, and I respected that at least. She did not make excuses. She just said, "You are right. I was a coward. And I am so sorry. Here is what I want you to understand about consequences, because the story does not end with everybody hugging." I told Claire I needed space. Real space. Not a dramatic breakup. Not a slammed door. Just honesty. I said I could not build a life with someone until I knew she would choose me and Nia over her father's approval. Out loud, when it counted, and not in secret when it was safe. And I meant it. I did not know if we would make it. I want to be honest with you. For a while I did not think we would. Then I dealt with Richard. I did not send the messages to his partners. I did not go to the press. Instead, I asked him to come back to my house one more time, and he came because men like Richard cannot resist the chance to think they have one. He walked in with that smile, ready to hear me take the check. And I set my notebook and printed copies of those text messages on the table, in the same spot where his envelope had been. And I watched the smile die. I said, "You wanted to see what I am made of. Here it is. I know everything. I know about Del. I know about the complaint. I know you had a man watching my daughter and Claire's students to build a lie. And I have it in your own words." He started to talk, and I stopped him. I said, "I am not going to destroy you, not because you deserve mercy. You do not. I am not going to destroy you because I have a daughter who is going to grow up knowing her father did not have to burn a man alive to keep his own dignity. So here is what is going to happen instead." And I laid out my terms. I told him the harassment stopped that night, all of it, forever. I told him he was going to make a call and get the false complaint removed from my work file, because his money reaches those managers, and I knew it. I told him he would never again go near my daughter or Claire's school. And I told him that I still would not take his check. Not then, not ever, because the whole point was that my life was never for sale, and he had spent a month proving to himself that he could not buy me and could not break me, and now he had to live with that. And then I said the thing I most wanted him to hear. I said, "You thought watching my world would show you a weak man. It showed you a man who carries more before 8 in the morning than you have carried in your whole comfortable life. You just could not see it, because you were only ever looking for the moment I fell." Richard did not have a speech ready for that. For the first time, the powerful man had nothing. He picked up his coat, and he stopped at the door, and he said one quiet thing that I did not expect. He said, "Claire never looked at me the way she looks at you." And then he left. The consequences kept unfolding after that, the way real consequences do, slowly and without a soundtrack. The complaint came off my file within a week. My overtime came back, though I never fully trusted where it had gone. Trey was already gone, and I heard later that his kid got the surgery, and I found that I was glad even after everything, because I am not built to wish a sick child harm over his father's weakness. I got a call 2 months later from a different company, a bigger and more respected outfit, offering me a supervisor position, real advancement, better pay, better hours for a father. And here is the part that matters. I got that job on my own. Through a contractor I had impressed on a job site, a man who had watched me work and remembered my name. Not through Richard. Not through anyone's favor. Through my own 2 hands and 11 years of showing up. I took it and I earned it, and no one can ever tell my daughter it was handed to me. And Claire. Claire is the hardest part to tell, because life does not wrap up as neatly as we want. She did the work. That is the truest way I can say it. She did not chase me with grand gestures. She sat down with her father and told him, to his face, that if he ever interfered in her life again she would be done, permanently, and she meant it, and he knew she meant it, and it cost her the easy relationship she had always had with him. She chose out loud when it counted. Over months, slowly, she and I found our way back to something. Not the same as before. Something more honest, with fewer illusions, built on a night at a kitchen table where all the ugly truth came out and neither of us ran. We are not married. I want to tell you we rode off into the sunset, but that is not the story, and I promised you the truth. We are together, carefully, still building. Nia adores her. Richard and I are not friends, and I doubt we ever will be. But a strange thing happened at Nia's 8th birthday. Richard came. He did not force his way in. He asked Claire first, and he asked me, and he came, and he brought a gift that was thoughtful and not showy. And he sat in the corner of my small backyard among people who had far less money than him, and he watched my daughter laugh, and this time the look on his face was not calculation. It was something closer to shame and maybe, at the edges of it, respect. He pulled me aside before he left. He said, "I spent 30 days trying to find the moment you would break. I have thought about it every day since. I think I was really trying to prove that a man could not carry what you carry, because if you could, then the way I have lived, keeping my daughter in glass, keeping the world soft for her, all of it was a kind of cowardice dressed up as love." He did not apologize with the word sorry. Men like Richard rarely can. But that was an apology, the realest one he had in him, and I took it for what it was. So let me tell you what I learned, because that is why I am sharing all of this. I learned that the people who doubt you are almost never really talking about you. Richard's challenge was never about whether I was good enough. It was about his own fear that the safe, controlled world he had built was smaller and colder than the messy, struggling, love-filled world I had built with far less. He came to watch me break, and instead he had to watch himself. I learned that dignity is a choice you make when destroying someone is right there in your hand. I had the power to burn Richard down, and I chose not to, and I did not choose that for him. I chose it for the little girl who was watching, and for the man I have to be when I look in the mirror. Revenge would have felt good for a night and cost me the thing I value most, which is being someone my daughter can be proud of. And I learned the hardest lesson of all, which is that betrayal often comes wearing a familiar face. It came from a friend who grieved my wife with me, and it came, in a quieter way, from a woman I loved who stayed silent when she should have spoken. And I learned that you can understand why someone betrayed you. You can even forgive it in time, without ever having to pretend it did not happen. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. You can hand someone back your kindness while still making them earn back your confidence. Most of all, I learned that no one gets to measure your worth by watching you struggle. Struggle is not weakness. Sometimes carrying a heavy thing without complaint, day after day after day, for the people you love, is the strongest thing a human being will ever do. And the people who have never had to carry anything are in no position to judge the ones who carry everything. I am still Marcus Bell. I still fix heating and cooling systems, though I run a crew now. I still braid my daughter's hair, and I have gotten pretty good at it. I still have Denise's sweatshirt in the top of my closet. And every so often, when a night gets hard and the floor feels like it might tilt again, I remember that a rich and powerful man spent 30 days trying to break me and could not do it, and I stand up a little straighter. So let me leave you with one question, and I really do want you to answer it in the comments because I read them. If someone with far more power than you decided to test you, to try to break your life just to prove a point, would you have found a way to win without becoming the very thing they accused you of being? Or would the temptation to burn it all down have won? Tell me what you would have done. I am listening.